What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we're going over the Week 6 wide receiver start and sits. We're going to let you know which receivers we expect to have a big game, and also let you know the ones that you should probably leave on the bench. But if you're still unsure between two players on who to start, you can always utilize the rankings available on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, is in the description box below. And this week, it starts to get a bit tricky. The bye weeks, they're really hitting us. Oakland, Indianapolis, Buffalo, and Chicago all will not be playing this week. So most of us, we're going to be dipping into our benches a bit more than we have been before. But with that though, let's jump into the matchups. The first one we have is Tampa Bay versus Carolina. Mike Evans posted a super dud, had 3 targets, didn't catch any of them, and scored a whopping 0 fantasy points. Meanwhile, Chris Godwin, 7 for 125 and a pair of touchdowns. The Buccaneers faced Carolina. Last time they played, Chris Godwin went 8 for 121, even scoring a touchdown, and I know a lot of you are expecting a repeat performance. One thing to keep in mind though is that since he had such a good game last time they played, Carolina will certainly be making adjustments. Fear not though, we still have him ranked as a mid-grade wide receiver 1, ahead of even Mike Evans. And speaking of Evans, for you Evans owners out there, I'm sure he cost some of you the week, but the last thing you want to do is to just bench him out of spite. He's still one of the better options at the wide receiver position, and even with that dud, he's wide receiver 14 on the season. We just have to adjust our expectations, know that games like this are possible. We have him ranked as a back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. And while that is a bit lower than we typically rank him, that's just because the Carolina pass defense is actually really strong. And as for those Carolina receivers, we have them ranked as flexes. Don't worry too much about the performance that they had the last time they faced Tampa Bay. That was more on Cam Newton. That was the game that he looked absolutely horrible. This time they have Kyle Allen, who shouldn't have too much trouble. We saw Teddy Bridgewater have a solid game, even connecting with Michael Thomas on 2 touchdowns. So Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore, they're going to be flexes this week. Moving into the next matchup, we have the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Minnesota Vikings. The biggest question mark in this matchup is definitely got to be Adam Thielen. He's coming off of his best performance of this season, and most people have to wonder, is this production going to continue? While yes, considering 2 of those 7 receptions went for touchdowns, those efficiency numbers just don't replicate themselves week over week. However, the 8 targets, which doesn't sound like a lot, were actually his season high and will likely resemble more of what you could expect from Thielen moving forward, as opposed to the 3 targets, the 5 targets he was getting earlier this season. This week against the Eagles, Thielen slots in as a wide receiver 1. Diggs is more of a back-end wide receiver 2. And for the Eagles, even with Jeffrey, it's a risky start. Minnesota is a top 5 defense against opposing passers. Alshon Jeffrey looks hobbled every time he plays. And the way that the Eagles spread the ball around, his targets aren't even a guarantee. So for those reasons, we can't recommend that you start Jeffrey as anything more than a flex. And you don't want to start any of the other Philadelphia receivers. Up next, we have Jacksonville versus New Orleans. Let's start with the Jags. DJ Chark, through 5 weeks, is a wide receiver 1. Last week, he received 11 targets, and the week before that, he received 8. So we don't have too much of a concern over his targets like we did earlier in the season. Feel confident starting Chark as a wide receiver 2. D.D. Westbrook, on the other hand, he's likely going to be shadowed by Marshawn Lattimore, who completely shut down Mike Evans last week. So if you own Westbrook, leave him on the bench. Moving on, we have the Baltimore Ravens versus the Cincinnati Bengals, Marquise Brown and Tyler Boyd. While Boyd has not been very successful in converting his targets into fantasy points, he should have a much easier time against this Baltimore Ravens defense, which has been giving it up through the air. This defense is not anything like it has been in previous seasons. They even ranked 28th against the pass. On the Baltimore side of things, we have Marquise Brown, whose fantasy day last week was saved by a touchdown. You'll notice Marquise Brown has dipped in the rankings just due to Lamar Jackson not looking as sharp as a passer, so he's not quite a wide receiver 2, but he's more of a high-end wide receiver 3. A guy you'd like to have in your flex just because of his ability to take any target and turn it into a touchdown. Up next, we have the LA Rams versus the San Francisco 49ers. For LA, Cooper Kupp has completely taken over the wide receiver 1 role. Whereas typically the targets were more evenly distributed, Cooper Kupp had 14 targets last week. There's no doubt he's a wide receiver 1, but as for the other 2, they're still going to be ranked as wide receiver 2s, but they may come in with a little bit more risk than they had before. As for the 49ers, honest, we really don't have a single receiver getting enough volume to be trusted in our lineups. It looks though that Dante Pettis is trending downward. He eventually will probably be benched, which could open up more opportunities for Deebo Samuel and Marquise Goodwin. If that does happen, maybe there's some fantasy relevance there, but there's no way we could possibly trust any of them in our lineup. If you want to watch a game this weekend that has a lot of fantasy points being scored, a whole lot of offense, then you have got to watch this game. It's the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Houston Texans. This game comes in at the highest over-under of the week, and we get the added bonus of potentially seeing a return of Tyreek Hill. Just be mindful he is going to likely be on some sort of limited workload, but Tyreek Hill, more than any other player, requires the least amount of volume to be productive. We have him ranked as wide receiver 21. That's assuming he plays. If he doesn't, that will instantly boost the players like Byron Pringle, Demarcus Robinson. Since we can't go back and edit this video, we will update the rankings available on our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that is in the description box below. But for the Texans, Will Fuller finally had his breakout performance. It was really only a matter of time. The targets were there, the snaps were there, his chemistry with Deshaun Watson in the red zone, he was long overdue. DeAndre Hopkins, on the other hand, he disappointed, but this is the type of matchup that's perfect for his get-right game. We have Hopkins ranked inside of the top 5. Will Fuller comes in as a back-end wide receiver 2, and we just got a perfect example of what Will Fuller can bring to your roster. Let's transition from one of the most exciting games to one of the most unimportant games of the year, the Miami Dolphins versus the Washington Redskins. Terry McLaurin, start him and start him with confidence. Miami has been torched by wide receivers all season long. Marquise Brown, Antonio Brown, John Brown. Even though McLaurin's last name is not Brown, he should easily find success against this defense. We have him ranked as a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. The only thing holding him back is just the shaky quarterback situation. For Miami, don't be tempted to start any receiver even against this poor Washington Redskins pass defense. It's more than likely a trap. Devontae Parker did score last week, but there are plenty of other players we would start over him. No Miami receiver is ranked inside of the top 50. Moving on, we have Seattle versus Cleveland. Seattle is not an easy defense, but they are on the road. We just saw last week, Cooper Kupp had an incredible game, so we know that receivers can find success against this defense, and there's no denying that Odell Beckham has that type of capability. And for Jarvis Landry, he's more in line with a back-end wide receiver 3, someone that you can put in the flex. For Seattle, we have Tyler Lockett, who continues to impress. He had an incredible touchdown that really showed off the connection between him and Wilson. Lockett could push for wide receiver 1 type production. And DK Metcalf, while he's more of a desperation play, but banking on Russell Wilson to continue this heater is not the worst decision you can make. Atlanta Falcons versus the Arizona Cardinals. This game has one of the highest over-unders of the entire week, and the Cardinals have been absolutely destroyed through the air. Needless to say, Julio Jones, we have him ranked as the wide receiver 1 this week. And Calvin Ridley, he is a back-end wide receiver 2, but one that has plenty of upside. If this game does score anywhere near the amount of points it's projected, there's a good chance a lot of players score, including Mohamed Sanu, who still is not ranked as a wide receiver 3, but I don't think any of us would be all that surprised if he reaches the end zone. Flipping over to the Cardinal side of things, we have Larry Fitzgerald, who is ranked as a high-end wide receiver 2, and although he has been a bit underwhelming the past 2 weeks, the targets do have to go somewhere. Christian Kirk, he may play, he may not. He's been practicing, but it's unlikely he's going to have a full workload coming off of an injury. And there's also a potential David Johnson might not play. There's no David Johnson, no Christian Kirk. The targets do have to go somewhere, and the most likely scenario is going to be Larry Fitzgerald. We're moving from one of the highest over-unders to one of the lowest over-unders. It's the Tennessee Titans versus the Denver Broncos. We're still not starting any Tennessee Titans receiver, and no, that's not a testament to the Broncos' pass defense. It's more about Marcus Mariota's inconsistencies in the passing game, but on the Broncos side, you could start Sutton and Sanders as wide receiver 3s. Just be mindful that Tennessee's pass defense is no joke. Quietly, they rank 10th, and Denver is not the strongest passing team. The next matchup we have is the Cowboys versus the Jets. Sam Darnold is going to return this week, but unfortunately, he finds himself in a very tough matchup. It's so tough that we would typically recommend starting Robbie Anderson if Sam Darnold is playing, but the Dallas Cowboys defense, coupled with Darnold taking so much time off, it's a recipe for disaster, so we don't have him ranked inside the top 40 this week. If we're talking Cowboys though, Michael Gallup, At this point, he's performed anytime he's been given the opportunity, so he should be a weekly start from this point forward as long as he remains healthy. Amari Cooper, he has top 5 potential this week, and both Cooper and Gallup find themselves in a plus matchup on a team that really wants to win, so what is not to love about that? Next matchup we have is Steelers versus Chargers, and it's really disappointing how much the Steelers offense has regressed without Ben Roethlisberger. Even Juju Smith-Schuster is now ranked as a wide receiver 3 for this matchup. I know that ranking doesn't sound all of that fair, but you have to understand, they're facing the Chargers, who have one of the best secondaries in the entire NFL. Then you have to couple that with the fact that he's banged up, he's not 100% healthy. The quarterback play is extremely inconsistent, and in a game that went to overtime, he only received 7 targets. So if he's not performing against weaker pass defenses, so how can we expect him to perform well against the Chargers? If there was going to be a game that he threw up a dud, I would not be surprised if this was the matchup. So when ranking him, we have to balance both the floor and the ceiling. We do have him ranked as a high-end wide receiver 3, which means some of you with really strong wide receiving cores could afford to leave him on the bench. To find out who we would start over him, you can always utilize the rankings. The link for that is in the description box below. We still have one final matchup, and it is the Packers versus the Lions. This is a very positive matchup for the Packers receivers. The hopes is, of course, that Davante Adams returns from his injury, but every news article, every blurb that comes out does not sound positive for a return this week or even a timetable for return. And if we're expecting him to miss, we are left with Geronimo Allison, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Jimmy Graham. Last week, each of those receivers really disappointed because without Adams, there was expected to be a bump in production, but unfortunately, the person who got the most benefit was Aaron Jones. That could certainly be matchup specific. We do know that the Cowboys are no pushover on defense, so it will be night and day different from the matchup we have against Detroit. It should give us an opportunity to see how this passing offense performs without Davante Adams, but until we see it, and we didn't last week, starting one and relying on them for points is going to be a giant risk. For Detroit, I know that both Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, incredible games, but that was a very specific game script, so we can't overreact to that one game, which leaves Kenny Golladay ranked as a mid-grade wide receiver 2. Marvin Jones is flex worthy, but with Marvin Jones, we know that his high ceiling comes with a very low floor. So we're banking on a touchdown, we're banking on a big play, not really much else outside of that. But guys, that's going to do it for today's video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about you hit that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.